Welcome to Workshop Topics. In this episode I will be refitting the gearbox after repairing the oil feed and painting, carefully lifting the Myford and testing the Boxford lathe. The last time I painted this lathe it was 26 years ago and I think it's lasted quite well, but it's time for a change. So I've repainted it using blue hammerite and I can't really figure out why it's a different colour. I thought this was the pot of paint I used all those years ago. This looks a good bit darker and possibly better, because the original colour looked like I'd bought the lathe from Machine Mart. Unfortunately though, I ran out of paint. I still have to paint the two doors, the one at the front, the one at the side, and some areas behind the machine that you can't see in this clip. It's a long time since my workshop has been as messy as this. But by the end of this week it will be much tidier. And I'm going to paint the floor. Well, at least my friend Rob is going to paint the floor. The workshop has a concrete floor, and this is okay, but it gets very dusty as I walk about on it. I'm hoping that the floor paint will stop this from happening. The first job of the day is to elevate the Myford. The chip tray is at the powder coaters, and that should be coming back in the next couple of days. And with the help of my late father's crowbar, I'm lifting the lathe, and hopefully I'll be able to fit the chip tray in position under the lathe and very carefully lower the lathe down onto it. Although I might need some help for this. In the last episode I fixed the oil feed to the gearbox, which had never worked and I really didn't know that. But it does now, so I can fit it all back together. The job starts by running a bead of silicone rubber around the edge of the casing. This needs to be oil tight because it's getting quite a lot of oil at the moment. This is a tube of silicone rubber that I bought for the Simplex project. It's heat resistant, but for this application it doesn't need to be heat resistant. All it needs to do is make the joint between the front cover of the gearbox and the gearbox itself oil tight. I thought this job was going to be difficult and I was not wrong. There are several things that need perfectly lining up inside the gearbox before the front part is fitted, and really I'm busking this because I don't know how this gearbox works. This was the first attempt and it was a failure. The levers slide gears around on spline shafts and you have to get it right, so I took it a bit further down. This middle part was very difficult to get right. The mechanism is very clever. Not only does it allow the main drive gear to mesh with the cluster of gears at the back, it also moves the mechanism from side to side. And there's no tolerance. This lathe is machined to a standard that I know nothing about. All the parts are what could be called a perfect fit, not an interference fit, not a slack fit, a perfect fit. I don't know how old this lathe is, but it's doing quite well. I've done this job before. When I first bought the lathe I had to dismantle it to fix the lead screw bearing. And I think I was just lucky when I put it back together. This time it proved to be a very painful process. Different parts of the dial mechanism engage with different parts of the moving gear, and it's fitted with things like this, a thrust race. Both of the washers were pitted on one side, so I just turned them over. First one of the hardened washers goes on the shaft, followed by the thrust race, and then another hardened washer goes at the other side. I really do like this old lathe. It's built to a standard, not to a price, and it must have been very expensive when it was new. My old Boxford is a very good lathe, and the little Myford that I've just bought is really nice and pretty, but they're not a patch on this. Both of the levers on the front of the gearbox have gunmetal forks which move the sliding gears from left to right. This lever on the right hand side allows you to engage either the feed or the lead screw. The lever and the gears need to be in exactly the right position before I fit the front. Oh yes, and did I forget to mention how well made this lathe is? The front locates on two pegs, and it's a push fit. It's not an easy fit, you have to tap it into place. I forgot to mention this rotary knob has to be in a precise position too. I'm only tapping this very gently, and I'm using a piece of bar in the recess of the mounting holes. The first time I closed the lid, it didn't quite work out as planned. Not just one, but both of the selector levers did not engage the gears inside the case. And to make matters worse, there isn't an inspection window. You can just get a torch in the gap, and move the gears into position. This is further complicated by the fact that both of the gunmetal forks can rotate in the ends of the shafts. It's nice having a large inspection window in the middle, but you can't see either side through this. If at first you don't succeed, try again a further 2 times. Or was it 3? I have to admit that this job really did test my patience, and the new paint on the lathe was still quite soft and hadn't hardened yet, so I had to be very careful what I touched. This, by the way, is the 3rd attempt, and I'm trying really hard not to drop these small woodruff keys down into the bottom of the lathe cabinet. The tolerances are so close, even fitting this knob onto the woodruff key took a while. It was not wanting to go on, then suddenly it did. I'm actually used to my own engineering, and I sort of build in tolerances due to incompetence. I will never make a machinist, and really I don't want to be. I've been quite happy being a music producer, and a recording engineer, and a computer engineer. Oh, and did I forget, a college lecturer. This has always been my hobby. I don't mean putting gearboxes back together, model engineering and building models. It was very satisfying when I turned the knob and the gear slid back and forth, very smoothly. It's never done this before. This knob on the gearbox is used for changing the feed speeds and the threads per inch when you're screw cutting. And although it's working fine, the numbers around the dial are actually 2 out and don't correspond properly with the gears. My patience and tolerance is fast running out. I'm getting very close to having to lay in a darkened room and take my medication. But alas, even though it started off okay, the selector fork was not engaging on the right hand side lever. So I started again. The silicone rubber had actually cured because it took so long to do the job. I scraped it off, and here I'm applying some new. This time the job should not take as long, because the first 2 times I will put down as a rehearsal. Even though I've videoed it, I won't show the repeat process, it would drive me daft. Suffice to say that eventually all of the levers engage with the respective gears inside the casing. Here I'm demonstrating the brilliance of this design. I rotate the dial and then I turn the knob, and the gear goes towards the gear cluster. It's really good. Pity I haven't got the dial in the right position. I will revisit this in a future episode, but definitely not now. The feed system and the lead screw work perfectly, so everything's okay. Nothing's fouled up other than the position of the dial, which doesn't fully correspond to the numbers on the plate. Before I redo this job though, I think I'd better let the paint dry. In this clip I'm refitting the brass plates, and I haven't bothered painting the central one, because I like the patina as it is. That's the headstock done. Here's the front of the gearbox. One job that I'm definitely going to do is cover up this control panel. I have the original plate for it, but it says wrong things on it. For instance, the left-hand lever was the variable speed lever. Originally, this lathe was fitted with a 3-phase, 3-speed, 2-horsepower motor, which was very big and far too powerful for what I wanted. There are of course less speeds available, but I don't need all of those speeds for what I do anyway. This lathe used to be grey long before I got it. When I got it, it was painted blue quite crudely. I quite like grey on a Myford. A lot of machine tools are grey, but I personally find it a bit depressing. And I'm quite happy with this blue colour. It will be even better when I finish painting it. Just as I finished the gearbox job, my son-in-law Robert appeared at the door and asked me if I could make a part for him. Robert is a farmer and he wanted a part for one of his tractors which had fallen off in the field. I didn't have any steel quite thick enough, but Robert gave me this old piece of half shaft. And what better to test the turning capacity of the Boxford lathe since I fitted the new belts. It also allowed me to use some spray cutting compound, but it smokes a lot. That's the problem with these cutting compounds. So after about 3 passes, the workshop was starting to look quite foggy. I felt it was time to leave and go and do something else not in the workshop. Just for the viewers who like to sit and watch turning operations, this is a turning operation, and I'll let the video play out with it. I'll leave it running to the end. And that's all from me for the moment. Stay healthy, thanks for watching, and I hope you found it useful. Please take the time to visit my Mainsteam Models website and click on the section of the website that says Video Playlists. And by doing that, you can find other videos that you may like to watch. And by using the playlists, you can actually watch the videos back to back.